St. Patrick's Day is almost here, and if you're looking to mark Ireland's National Day in an appropriate way, you're probably thinking about getting some good Irish whiskies. I'm Matt, I'm the Whisky Nerd, and today I'm going to talk to you about 5 different Irish whiskies that will suit whatever kind of St. Patrick's Day you are planning. First up is going to be the Irish whiskey brand everyone knows. It's going to be Jameson, but I'm selecting here the Jameson Black Barrel. It's a little bit better, it's a little bit deeper, a little bit richer, a little bit more full flavored than that standard kind of green bottle Jameson that everyone knows. It's a little richer, a little bit sweeter, it's a little bit, kind of just to me, a bit of a better whiskey. And if everyone you know has had that classic Jameson in the green bottle, go for this one here. It is still at 40%, so it is nice and easy, but because they aged it in extra charred alligator charred bourbon barrels, it gets a bit more rich and a bit more spicy and a bit more full flavored, so it actually delivers better in cocktails and as a neat pour. So if you're just looking for something a little bit simple but a little bit better than those bottom shelf bottles, Jameson Black Barrel is where you should start. And speaking of neat sippers, next up for my choice for a whiskey that's great neat, this one right here, Dingle. This is Dingle's single malt Irish whiskey, and for me, this is one of like the best value Irish whiskeys on the market because it comes in at a nice 46.2%, 46.3% alcohol by volume. It is a single malt and it's really, really good. It was mostly aged in sherry casks and with a bit of bourbon cask aging as well. They mix those two together. So it has this really deep, kind of natural, rich color. It has a bit more weight. It's not super high proof, so it's not going to be really hard to drink, but it's very nice, full flavored. You can use this in something like an old fashioned where you're just adding a little bit of sugar, maybe a little bit of bitters, but you're letting the spirit shine through. But for me, as a neat sipper, that is a fantastic little whiskey. It's something you can pour out, you can share it. It's widely available. This is a core release from them, so it should be pretty easy to find. It's also not too expensive. Just for a nice whiskey you can pour out for a few people and you can enjoy it quite well, or you can pop it in a little hip flask for yourself. You can take it on the road and you have a nice whiskey that you know is a great whiskey for sipping neat. And I did mention that while this one here is a little bit easier to drink because it is at 46.3%, sometimes you want something a little higher proof. Sometimes you want something with a bit of heft. Redbreast 12-year-old cask strength. This is, I know I said this is probably really great value. This is again very, very good value because you are getting a solid age statement, a 12-year-old age statement. It's Redbreast, single pot still, very good Irish whiskey. It is aged in bourbon cask and sherry cask, so it has a nice full flavor, and because it is a batch product, each of the batches is slightly different. This one here is 58.1% alcohol by volume. That's what, 116.2 proof in American numbers. And that is just rich and spicy and deep and full, and it's just a very, very great little whiskey. This here, my one here, is from batch 1 of 2022, so I think now the 2023 and 2024 are on the shelves, but you can always do a bit of hunting and you can do a bit of a comparison across them. But across all the batches there might be slight variations, but it's always a reliable product, so you can get kind of any one of the batches and you know it's going to be good. Redbreast, fantastic whiskey brand, long standing, and at high proof it is a very, very easy to drink whiskey. It's one of those whiskeys that everyone might have heard of, but maybe not everyone has tried. Like a lot of people might have tried the Redbreast 12, but maybe they've never tried the cask strength version of it. So it's a very, very good whiskey. If you haven't tried it, to pick it up, share it out again, enjoy it as a nice high proof sipper. But if you're also on the lookout for something that other people may not have tried or may not have heard about, the next option is a little bit different and a little bit weird because it's not fully an Irish whiskey. This here is Keeper's Heart. They have a couple of whiskeys that are Irish and different whiskeys. So they have the Irish and American rye. This here is Irish whiskey and American bourbon. So it's a blend of Irish grain whiskey, Irish single pot still whiskey, and American bourbon whiskey. So it comes in at 46% alcohol by volume and has this really interesting profile. I won't pour myself a glass of it. I'll put a link to all the reviews of these whiskeys down below, which you can check out afterwards. It has a really interesting kind of profile because on the nose it's very kind of bourbony. It's very like, oh, this smells, you know, charred oak, the caramel, the kind of almost peanut brittle, vanilla spice you get from bourbons. But then when you taste it, you still get those bourbon notes, but you get a lot more of that kind of sweeter, creamier whiskey from the grain whiskey there, from the Irish whiskey, and you get that kind of peppery, oily pot still spice from that Irish whiskey. So it comes through really well and has a nice kind of a mix of flavor profiles coming through, and just a very, very nice little whiskey. It is new enough. Keeper's Heart, I think they launched just a couple of years ago, so they haven't been around for a long time. Again, a whiskey maybe that not everyone has tried, but very much a crowd pleaser. Again, you could use this neat in cocktails. You can kind of do whatever you want with it because it's not also super expensive, doesn't have an age statement, but it's also a bit different to something people might not have tried. Speaking of things, again, more people might not have tried, before I go for my last whiskey, this is Pucci. This is something that is not whiskey, so I'm going to put it over there. This is Ireland's national spirit, so Pucci, and you can kind of think of it as like Irish moonshine. It's not actually Irish moonshine, but if you're thinking moonshine, you're thinking that kind of area where it's like a neutral enough grain spirit, which doesn't have to be made of grains. Like they can use potatoes, they can kind of use a lot of different things to make Pucci, but very, very nice. Rather than like moonshine, where it's just about the high alcohol volume, this here is a spirit that has to kind of taste nice, neat. So it's kind of, a lot of it is like whiskey. I think this one here, if you put this one into a barrel, age it for 3 years, it would become a whiskey. But this here is just a very, very nice little spirit. It's quite green, quite fresh, quite light. I always say it's kind of like between, if you think of like the cleanliness of like a vodka, where it has that nice, neat, clean finish, but the kind of almost herbal, botanical notes of a gin, and then the sweetness, the richness of a whiskey. That's kind of where Pucci is. It's kind of between all of those. It's not exactly all of those together, but it's kind of between them all. Comes through really nice. You can use it instead of vodka, you can use it instead of gin, or you can use it as it is, or you can just drink it neat because it is a nice little spirit, and just something, again, a bit different. A bit good way to mark Ireland's National Day with Ireland's national spirit. And before I get on for my last whiskey, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews, like the reviews of all these whiskeys, every Wednesday. I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday, and I put out videos like this every now and then on Mondays when I talk about different whiskies. And for my last whiskey, it's not going to be a great whiskey, but it's going to be a great whiskey in certain situations. This is what I call a guard whiskey. So a guard whiskey for me is something where maybe you've had a couple that night. Maybe you've had a few whiskeys that night and you're thinking, oh, I want something quick and easy to enjoy. You might not pour yourself the Redbreast cask strength because A, it's high proof and you don't want to overdrink, but also B, it can be a little bit expensive. So you might want something that's going to be a nice whiskey, but it's not going to be it's not going to be a bad whiskey, but it's also not a whiskey you're going to miss if you drink a lot of it. As you can see, I use this as a guard whiskey. Bushmills Black Bush. It's a good little whiskey. It's a lot better than I think the Bushmills kind of white label, sometimes called White Bush, but this is just, it has nice, it's a grain and malt blend with a little bit more malt than in the white label, a lot of sherry influence, quite nice, has a nice cork, and it's the kind of whiskey that, let's say you've got a person over and you don't really like them. Maybe they're a friend, maybe they're like, oh, they know you've got a good whiskey selection, like, oh, what have you got that's special? And they're trying to get a hold of some of your rarer bottles. You can say, oh, I'll pour you a bit of this. It's something that you can put out as a nice whiskey. It's not going to be a bad whiskey. It's not going to offend anyone to drink that whiskey. But at the same time, it's not going to be your rarer, more expensive whiskey. So it's what I call a guard whiskey for the end of the night, after you've had a lot, or maybe you've got something that maybe a new whiskey drinker, maybe a whiskey drinker, like I said, you don't like. Maybe it's someone you just want to pour a quick little measure of it. Go for a guard whiskey, something like that you can enjoy at the end of the night after you've had all your good whiskies to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. But those are just my picks for these whiskies. Maybe if you want, you can let me know down below what you would put as your neat sipper, what you would put as your high proof whiskey, what you would put as your guard whiskey. Let me know down in the comments below. Like I said, I'm Matt, I'm the Whiskey Nerd. I've talked a lot about whiskey today, so I think I'm going to pour myself a glass of whiskey, and I will see you next time. Sláinte.